All right, let's get started. Welcome to our Streaming Media East discussion on engaging live experiences for digital platforms. No matter how good your OTT content is, getting users to download an app or visit your website is only half the battle. What they will see and feel once they get there is a bigger question. Building a compelling viewer experience can be a huge challenge and a key differentiator that keeps your audience coming back. This panel will explore best practices and design elements of OTT platforms that drive viewer engagement and brand loyalty. So before we dive in, let's do a quick poll so our panelists know better who you are and what questions you might have and where you are in the process. By show of hands, how many of you work for a company that's already delivering OTT content? All right, about half the audience. How many of you deliver OTT content today and are here to find ways to make your OTT offering better? Oh, about the same folks, okay. And how many of you are at companies just getting started with deploying OTT content? About a fifth of the room. Okay, thank you very much. All right, well, let's get started. My name is Chris Knowlton. I'll be your moderator. I work for a company called BlueFrame Technology, which is the sports broadcasting made easy company. I'm going to have our panelists introduce themselves quickly, and then we'll dive in with some questions.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for coming, everyone. My name is Matt Smith. I'm the principal media evangelist and broadcast head for Brightcove. We are the largest online video platform globally and provide these compelling live experiences we're going to talk about today.
Hello, and thank you for coming out. My name is Mike Grushin, and I'm a co-founding partner at OMNIGON. OMNIGON helps brands and rights holders monetize their content and engage their audience. I've been around video for a few years, probably just like everybody else, starting with Real Networks and QT and Flash Media Server. In the last couple of years, some of the noteworthy items that I had the chance to work on is the Rugby channel, launched 2 years ago, and I had the chance to work with WWE and BAMTech to launch WWE Network.
Hi, my name is Ed Derse. My experience in OTT dates to about 2005, 2006, most recently as the managing director of the Rugby channel, which is a pure play SVOD OTT service, and stops along the way at Fox Sports, video game company called Gamefly, and Universal Sports Network prior to its acquisition by NBC, which is now the Olympic Channel.
Hi everyone, I'm Geert. I'm the VP Americas for Machina. We're a bit different from these companies that we're helping content creators to make their content interactive. So for many years we've been creating second screen apps for TV shows. So we work with big broadcasters, including NBC, to create second screen apps to play along with TV. And in the last few years we're focusing on live streaming. So we create a white label solution to create your own HQ trivia, but also make live streams on Twitch and Facebook and YouTube interactive so people can play along, participate, see more information, etc.
Great, thank you. All right, for our audience, as I mentioned earlier, we'd like this to be an interactive session. We can reserve a few minutes at the end for questions, but we'd much rather you just ask questions as they pop into your head, especially if they keep us on topic up here rather than come back to something later. So please feel free to raise your hand at any point if you do have a question. The session's also being captured for online participants, so when you do ask a question, one of us will repeat it for their benefit. All right, panelists. Consumers today are treated to some compelling live interactive content. Examples include sports broadcasts, esports tournaments, and real-time games that incorporate live videos, such as the HQ trivia game. Our session today covers many aspects of the live viewing experience, including ways to engage viewers by changing what they see on their screen and how they interact with it, plus what's happening behind the scenes that makes their viewing experience even better. Let's start by talking about interactivity. When you think of live streaming experiences, what does interactivity mean to each of you? Who would like to start?
I'll take it if it's okay. Whenever we approach any type of experience, live streaming or anything else we work on, we think about the audience, because that's where it starts. You really need to understand who will be consuming your content. Because, for example, US Open Golf, the type of audience that attracts that event is very different from HQ, trivia, or some other experience. So we start thinking about the audience and what they would like to see. And then we start doing user research to understand what we're coming up with is actually relevant to them. And if the project allows for that, we'll also do some type of A/B testing. So not only we're asking questions, we actually see usage patterns in order to determine if those features that we developed are relevant. Those features can include statistical overlays, depending on what type of the experience that the person is consuming the content in. If it's a mobile device, it's you have to make a decision if that's the right form in order to overlay statistical information on the fast-paced game. If it's golf, maybe there's more opportunity because it's not as fast-paced. So think about, like when you think about the interactivity, think about what type of content, audience, and what device it's being consumed on in order to figure out what is the right answer.
So I think interactivity is anything that complements that video experience. Mike, you touched on a couple. It could mean watching a U.S. Open or watching a Sunday night football game and be able to select a camera angle and look at something different. You are the director. You're controlling that experience. The NFL has been very keen, and the other leagues have too, in creating rich metadata feeds that accompany that information. Not to offend anyone religious in the room, but the NFL calls theirs Jesus, but it's GSIS. But that includes all of the information about the players, the catches, the throws, the interceptions, big plays, touchdowns, so that when we build a video experience and the player is assembled, that those elements can live in the player in a way that you, the viewer, understand. A touchdown is going to be a little yellow streak that you could click back on and watch that highlight again in real time. Same thing with Major League Baseball, right? You can stop and see who's on base and see what the guy up, at bat, what he's been doing that game, what he's done in the last 3 games. And this can happen on different platforms. And as technology providers and some of you as operators of these experiences, you have to think about the viewer and the platform that they're on. Because actual performance may vary. There's different things that you can do on an iPhone that you can or can't do on a Roku device. But you may be able to shake a remote, bring up a screen where you can interact with that information. So that's interactivity too.
I mean, for us, it's very specific in that we try to make an experience that brings the audience into the content. So most of what we do has an effect on the content itself. So for a game show, you can score points, you have leaderboards, and you can show those results on the screen. You can compare studio audience against players at home, those kind of things. And traditionally, we've done that in the second screen, but if we now look at the major live stream platforms, they offer more and more integrated opportunities to make that interactive experience. On Facebook, you can use hashtags and reactions to play along. And on Twitch, you can actually click now on the player directly to interact. And we see that an integrated experience like that increases the engagement by so many levels. So it's not only bringing the audience and making them part of the format, but also making that experience very seamless. On TV, our highest ever transition from viewers to players has been 20%. On Twitch, we see numbers like 90% of the viewers participating into a stream just because it's so intuitive. And if you look at something like HQ, I mean, it's most fun if you play along. You don't just watch HQ without even answering one question. So the participation rate is probably 100% for those kind of formats.
How many here are familiar with HQ? I just want to see. Okay.
I mean, as a producer and distributor of sports, primarily, you'll hear this from time to time. We think about sports as a narrative, right? An event is a narrative. So when we think about interactivity, we think very carefully about what's the best way to enhance or preserve that narrative. And sometimes the best way to do that is to not have interactivity. And with certain types of fast-moving events where statistical data may not necessarily do that much to enhance what's going on at the moment. And in certain sporting events, having access to a lot of data, or at least a second screen experience where there is a lot of statistical data. If you're a big fantasy fan, you want to have that data because you're tracking your fantasy teams at the same time. Golf is another good example of having sort of statistical data. Baseball, obviously, how does this guy face against left-handed pitchers on Tuesday nights when the wind is coming from the east is sort of interesting. But we approach it, and when you think about it, is really what is it that preserves and enhances the narrative of the event that's going on at the time. And because in the end of the day, it's that story that's being told on the field or court of play that we're most concerned with.
So sometimes you may want to do a clean feed then in order to not distract from the experience, but other times you might want to overlay additional information or give folks that option?
Yeah, I mean, you know, we, especially in a streaming experience where size of screen sometimes is an issue, right? If you try to load up a screen with lots of graphic information on a mobile device, it doesn't necessarily look so good.
Right.
But it's really just about, you know, sort of, obviously we don't have such a thing as a clean feed anymore. Everybody has obviously score clock chip and usually some kind of network bug that lives no matter what size the screen is for a number of reasons. But, you know, as opposed to a lot of graphic, you know, activity going on screen while the action is occurring.
Right.
And I think you touched on a very good point that rugby match versus a golf event is going to direct this event towards a specific representation of the statistical information. So in the golf event, there's a lot more opportunity to overlay either as a part of the feed or as a part of some smart logic within the application, because there are a lot of pauses, right? As players move from hole to hole. And rugby is very fast-paced. So as a fan, I would feel, one person's opinion, I would feel that it takes away from the content if there's too much overlay on top of this.
Yeah.
But if we start talking about Chromecast style experience when I will display the game onto the big screen and now have my device and I can interact with my device to get additional information, that is a very compelling use case.
I think maybe Ed, it was you that mentioned second screen. Can you guys talk a little bit about second screen, how you might use that or might use casting, and how you build that in with an interactive experience? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, happy to touch on this. So initial second screen came, I think, at the time when everyone was watching sports still on the big screen, right, through broadcast, cable box. And then we were building second screen experiences in order to supplement that. And second screen was either a laptop or tablet or a mobile device. And the idea was that people will continue to use these devices, right? Like they will continue to use Twitter, Snapchat, whatever they're using. So how do we keep their attention? So the idea was to give them more information, bring some of those social features into the experience, into that second screen experience. So not only I am seeing additional data points and potentially alternate angles, right, if that's allowed from the media rights perspective, but also the social is surfaced there, either whitelisted accounts that are allowed or just allow unfiltered. It's a little bit more challenging with some of our customers because they care about obviously no cursing and clean language. Right. So that's the conversations you have, and that's how we think about the second screen experience. Not to take away from the primary goal of engaging with the sport itself.
Okay.
When you say second screen, though, you mean throwing.
I was actually asking about both. So yeah, I'm interested in that side of it.
Sure, that's the other side of it. So there is I'd say a newish feature in the industry now to where some broadcasters and media organizations, knowing that there's an entire swath of audience who started watching on a device like this, they're on the train, they're in their car, whatever, they walk into the apartment or the home, and they've built into the application that native ability to pop up and do that, and say, you've got a Chromecast, you've got an Apple TV, you've got a Fire Stick here. Do you want to throw this, cast this game that you're watching, this NBA playoff game, to one of those devices? And you can say yes or no, and you cast it, you set your phone down, you sit down, you lean back, and you watch. Early results seem that that's got some legs. We'll see if it becomes a feature that, across different categories, maybe it's sports, news, that is because of the immediacy factor. Like, with most of this content we're seeing, I could put it down, I'll come back to it later, I've got to start cooking dinner. But if it's a game in progress, you don't want to miss the game, you don't want to wait for the highlights later, you could throw it, continue watching the game on a different screen, and not disrupt the experience whatsoever.
I think these days, everyone expects that any app or any experience that delivers video will have both Android Chromecasts built in or the Apple Wi-Fi AirPlane. So if you want to take it a little bit further and make it smarter, where the device determines that you're now at your home and then prompts you to say, which device would you like to continue on? That, I think that's a very nice feature.
Sure.
For us, second screen was the only way to reach the viewer in the first place, because on TV there's very limited possibilities for interactions, and if there's possibility for interactions, it's different per platform. Xfinity, Comcast tried the voice voting for the first time this season, which could be done through the app on the website and on their Xfinity platform, but that was for, I mean, it's for a limited audience. So what we like now about those new OTT platforms that are coming up, and that can be owned and operated or on third parties like Twitch or Facebook, is that you have much more control and the integration is much more seamless. And to come back in the information overload, I think it's very important to have that experience to be able to play along if you want to, but don't force it upon viewers if they just want to lean back and just watch the show.
So let me ask something, Mike, you mentioned about the possibility of filtered or unfiltered social media content. And I know a lot of people have questions about that and they wonder how they can actually filter social media comments that might be appearing across on one of their experiences. Are there good tools for that? And is that a best practice that you would recommend?
So moderating your social conversation, absolutely. If you're not doing it yet, you should definitely be considering.
A human tool.
What we're seeing in the industry is that if you integrate that social conversation into your broadcast, into your second screen, you will get that engagement, right? Like that's, I think that all of us are saying that. There are a number of tools, right? Like without naming names, but there are a number of tools that play in this social aggregation world. What they allow you to do is either to say, these 5 accounts are whitelisted, right? And the only thing you're doing is you're creating a feed, right, that aggregates multiple things. So you can either whitelist a certain number of proven accounts, right? And you can even add some of your alpha users into that once they prove themselves. You can search by hashtag, you can search by certain parameters, and most of these systems already integrate some type of a filter that will eliminate curse words and inappropriate content, right? And today with machine learning and AI, like that gets better and better. If you are thinking about globally, like internationally, then that becomes a bit more complex because now you have to deal with that language filtering across multiple languages. So there are certain tools, and they've been around for a while. The idea is, you can also, when you create these feeds, you can automatically put things in there, or you can allow your moderators to approve things as they go in. That creates a delay. So in most cases, we choose not to do that because it's a lot of work and it creates a delay. That's it.
All right, thanks.
But in the live environment, that comes with risks.
Yeah, right.
So it's more fun that way.
Add your 7
What we've seen is that if we build in social experience, especially like things like chat, Facebook and Twitter are a little bit less. But if you build in chat, people still use WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger because that's where their family is, that's where their friends are. It's very difficult to create a social experience within an app that people will use within that boxed off ecosystem. So for us, we tried it many times, or our clients wanted to build chat into the app, but usage was terrible. And now again, if you look at HQ Trivia, if you look at the chat, it doesn't really add that much value to the experience, except for that it's live, and that you can see people are commenting on questions, but a lot of it is noise and unwanted comments that people just swipe away. So doing chat is very difficult, so sticking to socials like Facebook and Twitter is already a good filter to start with.
So you mentioned earlier here, talking about that, creating interactive formats or engagements on big video platforms like Facebook and YouTube and Twitch. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Is that what people should do, or is it easier to do that, or should they be building their own experience rather than sort of committing to one of those big platforms?
Right. I mean, it comes back to the discussion about content, of course, but for certain content on those platforms, it works really well. Although the interaction on Facebook and especially YouTube is very limited, and basically it's only the chat, so you can use hashtags and comments to interact with it. On Twitch, they launched Twitch Extensions, which is an interactive layer on top of the video player that you can customize yourself. So we've been working with a number of game publishers to create an interactive layer on top of the video of Twitch where people can interact with the game. It can either be see additional data, answer polls and trivia, but it can also be influencing the game itself. So there's been a developer from Montreal that launched a new game, the Darwin Project, and that was very deeply integrated with the Twitch extension. So people were playing the game, and the viewers could say, okay, at that location in the map, I'm going to drop a weapon, or that location in the map is now closed off for all the users. So the game was dictated by the viewers. It didn't reach a big mass, but that's mainly because there's a lot of competition from Fortnite and other popular games. But the idea behind it was that it's a very shared experience between both the player and the viewer at the same time. And Twitch is the only platform that made it possible by allowing that seamless integration between interactivity and video.
Okay. But in terms of interactivity, Chris, I think if you hitch your wagon to someone else's, you're dependent on their roadmap and their features and the things that they're going to release, whether or not they're important to you. So know that going in. I would always advise people not to put all their eggs in one basket, but free tools are hard to pass up. But know that that interactivity and that experience can't be controlled as well as what you can do with an owned and operated experience in your own app, on your own website, your own turf.
Right.
And our customers say the same thing. And our customers are obviously a little larger in size than just somebody trying to start a channel, but they want users and they want to have that audience coming to their owned and operated, so they have that relationship. Because Facebook is currently obviously under a lot of stress, so they will be changing their algorithms. They will be changing monetization models, right? How people make money, and you have no control over that if that's how you build your business. If you start to spread your investment across multiple things, then you have just a bit more hedging that you're accomplishing by approaching this. But I would say, we also have conversations with some of the smaller, younger content producers. Pick a channel, see what works, and then start expanding.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask, if maybe experimenting with an established platform is sort of a good way to try it, test the waters, and then from there, as you realize what features you need, maybe then build your own. Maybe that's a best practice?
There's a use case for that, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, and I mean, I think HQ has proven that there's still a market for owning your own operated platform and creating something from scratch. People are still willing to download an app and are even willing to tune in at a certain time during the day. So I think that really opened up a new market and opened the eyes of a lot of people that you don't have to go to the Facebooks or the Twitches of these worlds, but that you can actually still create your own 2 million audience within a few months if you have the right idea and the right app and the right technology.
Yeah, that was pretty amazing to see HQ Trivia go from 0 to 2.5 million users in just a couple of months. Yeah. That was 2.5 million concurrent players, basically.
I fully agree with that. I would also add marketing, right? Like they had
absolutely. Execution was very
great.
Cool. Sure, go ahead.
Sometime you're mumbling. So what was the company you just said went from 0 to 2 million?
Oh, sorry, it went from 0 to 2.5 million
HQ Trivia
viewers. The HQ Trivia app.
Okay,
yeah.
and then earlier you asked us did we know who HQ Trivia was?
Yes.
Some of us did not, but you didn't tell us who.
Oh, I'm sorry. So HQ Trivia is an interactive app. It allows you to join. A live moderator is streaming video to you in real time on an app, and you are seeing questions, and the audience reacts to those questions. You get to pick from multiple choice. And at the end of 37 questions, they've narrowed the audience from 250,000 users, let's say, down to one winner by essentially whittling out everybody by asking all these questions. But it's happening in real time because you're seeing the answers appear online in real time. They're responding in real time. So it's not only interactive, it's live, and it is real time. It's really ultra low latency. So it combines a lot of interesting aspects.
And it's appointment based.
Sorry?
3 p.m. and 9 p.m. every day. So you know when it's on, you know when it's being played.
Is your 12 question? 12.
Sorry?
12 questions.
Oh, 12 questions. Yeah, but I know some have gone as far as 37. But yes, right. Yeah, usually it's shorter than that.
And what's interesting, that game produced an interesting conversation with my 11-year-old. So he was asking, why is this video so pixelated? So I had to explain to him the cost of bandwidth and CDN.
This ain't Netflix, son.
Right. In this case, the lower latency has to take priority over the resolution. Okay, great. As much as we hate to admit it, I mean, talking about that and low resolution and latency, sometimes things do go wrong with live streaming. audience, I'm going to ask you, how many of you have ever hit a problem when you're streaming something and either the UI doesn't load or you see the buffering symbol or something like that, whether it's Netflix or a live experience? I mean, if anybody does not raise your hand, I'm not going to believe you.
That's right.
So even with the big name brands, there are challenges, and sometimes it is on their side, sometimes it is a network issue on your side, but there are always issues that go wrong. So panel, from your perspective, especially for live and real-time events, this is particularly challenging. You can't just, it's not like an on-demand file that you have to work with. You're dealing with a live audience that is now missing part of the action and won't recover from it necessarily. So how should the user experience be managed when things go bad?
And for which they are paying.
Yeah, right, if they're paying for it especially. Yeah, what are your thoughts on that? How do we handle that? There are all sorts of different aspects that could come into play here.
And I wish I knew the clear and clean answer to that. I mean, sort of I threw this curveball in, right? We keep talking about enhancements and how much better streaming is getting, and it is. But we live in a live production environment, and this happens on broadcast television. World Series went out for 10 minutes last year, right? Because both generators blew in broadcast trucks. So anybody who's worked in live production knows that stuff goes bad. And we're still in really early days. I liken streaming to sort of television in the 1960s. Remember when you used to get in the middle of a Celtics-Knicks game, we are experiencing technical difficulties. So stuff happens, and we're dealing on open systems. Everybody has different devices. Everybody has different last mile. And so problems happen all along the supply chain from venue to the end user. And it's not always easy to find those out. And one of the challenges that we've had in trying to manage issues, no matter where they occur, is how do you message your audience in the right way, and especially in the age of social media, where everybody is waiting to be aggrieved, and the moment you have a problem, they're all over you, and it's a real challenge. One of the things that when we first started, right, something had happened and the screen would go black, and it was like, well, that's just not acceptable. And then we created an automated slate so that if anything, the stream for any reason broke for more than 5 seconds, a slate saying a technical difficulty slate went up, and what happened was everybody started screenshotting that and posting that on social media at every opportunity. So even when you are acting in good faith to try and message and trying to manage that, I think having more capability within players and in the player itself to indicate that there's a technical issue, or to be able to message more directly, something that we should be thinking about, or other ways of messaging the audience. It's a really difficult problem, and especially in a live environment, right? You can correct something within 2 minutes, but the 100 meters in the Olympic Games takes less than 10 seconds. So you miss that, or you miss the finish of a race, or a crucial score in any kind of competition, or try, your audience is vastly unhappy.
Mm-hmm. And it's also it's a tough situation because audience doesn't understand all the complexity. They're comparing this relatively new technology to the broadcast technology that's been around 40, 50 plus years, that has been improving, and it became pretty solid, right, for most of it, except for a few occasions.
It operates on a closed system.
So we're being compared to what broadcast style system to some of the complexities and some of the challenges that the internet brings. But think about this, like AWS and cloud infrastructure did not exist 10, 12 years ago, right? And then just think about how much easier it is today. Like I still remember standing up encoders and physical boxes, right? That doesn't happen today. In another 5 years, I don't think we're going to be having the same conversation.
Although even with AWS. So in 2015, the Rugby World Cup, we had a separate OTT product at Universal Sports Network, and 30 minutes prior to the start of the USA's first game, and it was a pay-per-view, it was a subscription product. 30 minutes prior to the start of the USA's first game against Samoa at 3 o'clock in the morning is when AWS's big database server in Herndon, Virginia went down. And I got 2,300 emails that day because I was locked into the customer service email. And it just happens, right? There's nothing that we could have really realistically done unless you had a completely redundant system. And only a very few number of companies and entities are capable of doing it to that degree, especially when you're a startup business or something like that. We had redundancy built in to the extent that we could do that, but these happen. So my point is that when we think about interactivity, we should also think about how do we manage that entire interactive experience, even when things don't go exactly as planned.
Just say you're very sorry, and here's a Rick Astley video.
I think that to these points, it's like showing like we're experiencing technical difficulties,
Yeah.
or doing something like I'm just thinking back to 404 pages, right? When
Right.
Twitter, the sad whale or fail whale,
Exactly.
right? That is, while it's not great, but it's better than
Nothing.
right. And then people talk about it. It creates public interest. So there's something to that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we use social media a lot to manage that because that's where they go. They don't always want to, they just want to vent most of the time, and you explain the issues. Some people are, especially when you deal with them directly, are usually reasonable, but some people aren't, and you have to become a little bit immune to it. I mean, as much as we like, we love talking about sort of user experience and getting user feedback, but you also realize that that's a small sample of, you may have tens of thousands of users, and you may have 10 or 15 that are just murdering you on social media and posting everywhere. And yes, your boss or your chairman's going, well, but that's horrible, and it is horrible. But I could walk out and give everybody $100 bills, and there would be 8% of the people here would complain that I didn't give them 20s, right? So that's just the world we work in.
So would you say there are any best practices that you'd recommend? One I heard was have something. Second was maybe use social media. Are there anything else, especially in these environments where some of what you are delivering is over open systems that you have no control or insights into?
Well, you have to be monitoring live. I mean, you need to really be watching what you do.
Okay.
Right? And when you spot those issues, you need to get on it really quickly, right?
Primary and backup too, right? I mean, you've got to have multiple.
Right. Yeah, I mean, in a live production environment, we always have. We try to institute full redundancy at every step. That's not always easy because sometimes, you're taking, if we're not producing it ourselves, if we're taking an international feed that's coming out of BT Tower in London and we have to grab that and turn it into a stream, we're not bringing in two different feeds, one from Sky New Zealand and one from BT Tower, right? That's just cost prohibitive, and the economics of sort of the SVOD business aren't there, unless you're at just enormous scale. Right?
And it's not clear, audience, like a lot of you are in OTT business, but for example, I think sports is extremely complex, right? Because if there's a truck outside of the stadium event, right, what happens if that truck has an issue, right? If you bring two trucks, do you have two different crews, like somebody gets sick, right? So just map out all of the things that can go wrong, right? And see what you can do at a reasonable cost at each one of those possible failure points, right? And with technology today, it gets cheaper and easier than with some of the human factor. Depending on what the event is, if this is like events that happen every couple of days, then it's a little bit easier because you have the same team that that gets used to it, right? So you have your standard operating procedures, but the team just works well together. They know what happens and how to address it. There are some events that we work with Brightcove on. US Open happens once a year, right? We spent 2.5 to 3 months working together and doing testing, end-to-end testing, right? What does it look like when the stream comes in from Fox Broadcasting into all of the middle transition points? And we test failover, we test, let's turn off this encoder and see what happens, right? Like we test all of those slates that tell the user what's happening. So doing that type of testing and having a war room during the event where everybody that was a part of that testing and preparation is there. Everyone from, if you're using Akamai for your CDN to Brightcove to whoever your provider is, make sure everyone's on the call depending on the importance of the event.
Well, I think that's an important point. Not only test your best case, but definitely test your worst case and make it as random as possible. Shut parts of your system off and see what happens. I think we discussed it yesterday a little bit as well. Build a chaos monkey for your platform that just randomly shuts down parts of your network and part of your infrastructure and see what happens. because that's the only way to really know how to respond to an incident like that, because it's always something that you didn't expect. Because if you expected it, it's being taken care of, it's being redundant. And it's been much easier for us when we just did the second screen and not had to involve the video, because making redundant platforms for a live video infrastructure is much more difficult than for a traditional app or website where you have much more control over all the components that you're using within the entire ecosystem that from server to the end user. So yeah, test for the worst case and not just the best case scenarios.
My next comment is not going to be completely related to this, but I think it fits into this theme that we're discussing. Don't think about these launches as projects where you launch and you're done, right? Especially in this day and age when platforms change, devices change, the underlying available components from Microsoft, whoever, are becoming more commodity and easier to use. Think about it as a longer-term product that you're continuing to evolve, that you continue to introduce tools that will monitor or try to break it and see how the system evolves. It's very hard to say, okay, in 6 months we're going to launch this experience, we're not going to touch it. That's just not the reality of today's world of technology or media.
Okay. So we've actually been working around the fringes of the next question, which is talking about behind-the-scenes technology, not what the users are interacting with, but what's actually powering some of those experiences. So delivering video has continued to evolve over the last few years. And you not only want everyone to be able to see the content, but you want them to have the highest quality possible for the bandwidth that they have. And when interactivity is involved, you want it to be at the lowest latency possible. What are the best practices for providing a great experience when it comes to delivery?
I mean, if I look at the projects that we do, we create solutions that are completely operated and managed by the client. So we allow the client to do all the production, creating all the content that needs to be created for the interactive part and also for the video part. But that requires a very foolproof system, and that can sometimes be challenging because it makes sense for you, it makes sense for the internal development team, but then you give it to the client and they find a way to break it. So for us, it's the training part and making sure that every person that's involved in operations is trained for every scenario that's possible in managing that live production. Because if there's a way to screw it up in the back end, if you don't train well, it's very likely to happen, and you have to have some smart people to find out within a few seconds what's wrong and fix that.
I'd say I guess it's a foregone conclusion, but if anyone in this room is not using adaptive bitrate technology, then you're doing yourself a disservice. It's been around, it's matured enough, it works across all the devices you're going to reach. So, use that adaptive bitrate technology, use HLS, because it just enables you to adapt amongst those platforms. To Geert's statement, I'd say, make sure that you understand the hardware that you're going to be using to originate that live event. Whether it's something that you're renting or it's something that you're making a purchase for, make sure that you understand and even try to see around the next corner to know whether or not you're going to need to integrate closed captions, or if you're going to monetize that content, if you're going to have breaks where you want to signal in a break and sell those digital ads like you do your broadcast ads. There was a session here yesterday. It was very informative and great session, but it was fantastic if you were just in the business of streaming a parade or a one-time event where it wasn't really complex. If it's an enterprise grade type scenario, if you're offering a channel or a bunch of channels, make sure that you're thinking about those requirements. And it kind of reminds me of that statement my grandmother made years ago: you get what you pay for. So don't skimp on your hardware infrastructure, understand it, use some of the latest tools and technologies. Don't necessarily be bleeding edge, because you can end up chasing some problems if you get that too far ahead of the curve. But be smart, educated, and not necessarily too thrifty with your hardware lineups.
I mean, one of the things that we've found to be we try to mimic the best practices that, in sports production or broadcast television, but it's really hard in a streaming environment. If you're not, a huge entity, right? We don't have staff. We don't have a NOC. We don't. I mean, in the streaming world, the lack of not having sort of a virtual network operations center is a real challenge for people. So you have to set up, and we have to test, right? We do have to pre-test, even things that we do on a pretty regular basis. We still, because, does the Wowza instance, is it configured properly for what it's getting? And and is everything flowing the right way? And are we getting signal the way we're expecting it to signal according to parameters that, we've specified, which change from time to time? Sometimes the guys on the other end at BT Tower plug in the wrong event. And you're just like, why am I looking at a soccer match from France instead of the rugby match? And so it's hard because you're trying to look. One of the great gifts of streaming and the internet is that we can see a lot more stuff, and we can often do things and produce things that could never be produced before because we can do it less expensively. But those best practices were there for a reason. So you got to find workflows, and you have to find ways of testing or methods and technologies that will help you do that. Like something really simple, right? We for any live event, usually we'd have somebody in Colorado who's their streaming ops manager interfacing with guys who are in Uruguay. We're in LA, we're producing from number, but everybody's on a Slack channel. So we, instead of trying to set up a conference line, we use a Slack channel, which works just as well or better than setting up some kind of bridge somewhere or something like that. I mean, that's just really simple stuff, but it's hard, and especially in a live environment, and understanding that you have a very short window of time when things go wrong to get it fixed without ruining your broadcast.
Right. I think both to what you just said and what Matt mentioned earlier about redundancy, when you look at emulating a broadcast signal flow, but you're doing it in the streaming world, what does that look like in terms of redundancy? What pieces do you need there? Is it second encoder? Is that multi-CDN?
So we always have a backup encoder.
Okay.
Right. So that would probably be number one, right? If you're doing a live event, we always have, and we have a failover in place, right? Mm-hmm. So that's your best from a production standpoint. So in rugby, we're not, we weren't dealing with going into stadiums that are completely wired, that have better infrastructure than, we are often literally shooting in the middle of a field in Madison, Wisconsin with the wind blowing, and it being 40 degrees and raining, and, so we keep redundant live view units. So if we were doing, I don't know how many, but sometimes we do a one camera shoot, sometimes we'd have more, but we'd always have redundant units. We had to bite that bullet in terms of the extra rental to have that ready for us to fail over. Sometimes if we're in a venue that has, a pop somewhere to it, or, from, one of the providers, and we can be really secure, we might just run it off a Teradek and have the live view unit as a backup, or vice versa, right? So from a production standpoint, obviously having some kind of redundancy, and then certainly in terms of your back end, in terms of the encoders, having some redundancy, and then having people in place when you're doing a live event who can, for want of a better term, trace route if something goes bad, right? Because there's so much. I mean, I've had, in my experience, I have had things go wrong from one end to the other, and sometimes you're chasing down. We did a match, a sevens tournament from Dubai, and for whatever reason they were routing it through Mumbai, and it just wasn't getting there. So by the time the match was over, we were 12 minutes behind, and people were screaming because they were seeing live results elsewhere. So the next day, it was the first day, the next day we switched the ingest point to Frankfurt, and we were fine. So, we lose signal sometimes from venue because cameras go down. or there's weather conditions that interrupt. And we've had, we've lost connections to CDN sometimes. I've seen, the servers crash from time to time. So it's sort of at every step of the way. So you've got to identify all your points of failure and have some kind of systematic way to say, okay, if things go wrong, where is it? And where is it most likely to be based on experience?
Right.
I have a quick question just to understand in the audience. How many of you come from the broadcast background that understand a lot of? Okay.
About half
So
the audience.
I did not. I came from IP software development, so I learned quite a bit over the years, and it's complicated, right? If you don't necessarily have to deal with it, don't deal with it. It's complex, right? So a couple of things to add. I think this is a great contribution. The fact that you're here and getting educated, that's a huge step, right? As you are thinking about how to make your systems better, somebody's always coming up with new technology, right? You're obviously listening to artificial intelligence, machine learning, right? How to automate production, how to create highlights automatically based on your content. Because right now, a machine can understand that it's a rugby or football, soccer match. It can understand the significance of a specific event, right? A player is running with the ball towards the goal. That's a key event. Probably it should be clipped. Understanding the moving pieces, right? So Ed spoke about it. I touched on this. Understanding all of the different moving parts within that equation, and thinking about each one. Think about the redundancy, but also how can you optimize it. Where do you put the encoder? Do you put the encoder in the field, or do you provide a higher quality stream to somewhere else and you do it there, right? Central editing versus on location editing. Think about every one of them and think about from the ease of kind of preventing issues, but also from the cost perspective.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I think we are out of time. So thank you all for being here with us, and thank you to our panelists for your insights. If you have any further questions, we'll be around for a few minutes. Come on up and ask us. Otherwise, thank you for attending.